first of all, thank you for coming today. And if you've seen the program today, we're going to have a very bird-filled night tonight. So I think that's something to celebrate. And although the talk or the society is about the Northeast, let me bring you for the next 15 minutes to somewhere very far away. It's actually 10,000 kilometers away to a country in Southeast Asia called the Philippines. So this is where I came from, and I came to the UK 2 years ago to do my PhD. So, in the Philippines, because of technology, we are now able to transport everyone in this room to the Philippines and watch this aerial video of a rural community, or what you would call a countryside here in the UK. In the background, you can see the forested mountains, which is called the Sierra Madre, which is one of the last strongholds of forest in the Philippines. And at the foothills of this mountain, you can see open spaces. These are degraded and open areas because of agriculture. And in this case, it's primarily planted with corn and rice. Agriculture is something that is a global driver for biodiversity loss. And even if our countries are far apart, UK and the Philippines, we still share the same problems. And agriculture is driving, it's a problem worldwide as well, not just here and in the Philippines. When I was flying over for the first time to the UK, I looked out the airplane and saw a landscape that is not that different from that video that we've seen a while ago. Here in the UK or here in the Northeast, we would have pastures and agricultural lands dotted with tree lines as well as hedgerows. And even if you go to Kildare area, we would have forestry areas where there's patches of forest amidst a matrix of open and cut landscapes. So these are classic fragmented landscapes that we see worldwide, here in the UK, in the Philippines, and so forth. With that in mind, I was curious and I wanted to know how birds will be impacted by such fragmentation. And so for my PhD, with my supervisor, Marian, we set on to study how bird communities and their movements are affected in the fragmented forest landscapes in the Philippines. And this project was supported by many institutions and funding agencies. So we know that forest fragmentation is the process where a continuous landscape full of forest, for example, gets degraded due to human activities and turned into these patches, these islands that are increasingly isolated from each other and also getting smaller and smaller in terms of area. Now, something that is very clear is that habitat loss would cause species to decline. But what we don't realize most of the time is that there is another distinct effect that is happening, and that is forest fragmentation effects. So if you take this patch of island, or a patch of forest rather, it's actually not going to be a full forest for the species that are living there. Highlighted around this island is the edges, or the forest edges, and these are affected by edge effects. So if you are in the middle of that forest, you would probably feel a bit cooler. But if you are outside of the forest or in the edges, the conditions are different. So, as a bird or as a species that is heavily dependent on the forest, that habitat edge or forest edge is not counted as a habitat. So there is distinct effects between habitat amount as well as habitat fragmentation. It's not that hard to imagine, actually, what forest fragmentation can cause a community. We only have to look back 4 years ago, when COVID hit and our communities were fragmented. Do you remember the time where you cannot go out and buy some groceries? Where your access to opportunities, foraging, or even mating, perhaps, are getting restricted because we cannot move around. That's the same thing that is happening to our birds and biodiversity in general. Specifically, for my thesis, I'm looking at how bird communities are impacted. Are there species that are winners? Are there species that are losers? Who are getting extinct or extirpated from areas that are highly fragmented? And because existence or occurrence in an area is heavily dependent on whether they can move around that area, we are also interested in movement. Can a bird from that patch fly to a different patch and cross that uninhabitable matrix of agricultural areas? So with that questions or those aims in mind, I choose a study site in the northern Luzon in the Philippines where the star is. And in that area, I chose 6 sites. And if you can see on the Google Earth image on the back, that's actually what my site looked like. It's heavily, heavily fragmented because of agriculture. And in that area, it's primarily growing corn. So to answer some questions that I'm interested in, I did point counts. So basically, you have points scattered in the landscape. And if this is my point right now, I will record all the birds that I can hear and see within 10 minutes. And alongside that bird data, I'm capturing my habitat data, which are the trees around me. I will measure their height, their species, their growth, etc. And on a bigger scale, I'm measuring the landscape. So within a 500 by 500 meter plot around me, how much is covered or how much area is covered by forests, and what is the edge density, a metric of fragmentation. So with those data, after 2 months of field work last year ago, I went to 6 sites and was able to record 5,000 birds across 124 species. And what I found is actually very interesting. So shown here is what a low fragmented landscape would look like. It would have high forest cover and low edge density. In comparison, this is what a high fragmented landscape would look like. Less forest, higher edge, but interestingly enough, there were more species and more individuals. If we stop or we just look at that result, then I would be saying that fragmentation is good for biodiversity. Now, I know a lot of people would have violent reactions towards that. And of course, I wouldn't want that message to be recorded, so please delete this part of the video. This is not the message that I want to give, okay? If we are to analyze our data, we have to look more closely to the community profile. Who are the birds being represented by my data? And shown here in the Venn diagram is where the species are found. So I have 3 habitats: agriculture, clearing, and forests. And 50% of them actually can live in all 3. That means they are habitat generalists. And only 17% of my species are dependent on forests, like they only exist inside forest. So my data, the one that is good for, that is preferring fragmented landscapes, these are the generalist species. And if we look at our abundance data, these are the top 3 species that are constituting 25% of my data. So they're Philippine bulbul, tailorbird, kukal, and all 3 of them are very common and least concern in terms of IUCN. So if we are to edit that message a while ago, it's not fragmentation is good for biodiversity, but rather it's good for common and generalist species. Is that more acceptable? Yeah, okay, that's good. So when we ask questions, we have to ask the question, who do we want to target for conservation in the first place? General biodiversity metrics, like how many species are there, how abundant they are, they're not enough to tell us how good our conservation is. So we must be looking at more closely the community composition. Are there more forest-dependent species? Are there more fruit-eating birds, which are very critical for seed dispersal? Are there invertebrates that are regulating insects in the area? So with that, I look at how forest species are related to forest amount, and we did found the expected results. More forest species. And that's easy enough to translate to conservation. If we plant more trees in the degraded areas, then we increase forest and we have more forest bird species. Interestingly, in areas with high edges, so in that kind of landscape, for example, what we found is that there's more fruit-eating birds. So when you think about it, these birds are attracted to where the food is, kind of like people, I guess. And so, these fruiting trees like ficus, which birds absolutely adore, they're mainly found in areas at the edge because that's where the sunlight is. So that's where they fruit, and they are where the birds go. So this is one of the birds that I found in my landscape. This is a spotted imperial pigeon enjoying an afternoon snack on this native tree shown here in the picture. So this got us thinking. If birds are going to edges, and these birds are fruit eating, they're very critical for dispersing the seeds, right? So maybe, actually, this might be a good thing for the forest. Because if the birds stay in the edges, and they go to degraded landscapes and poop the seeds that they eat, then that can be the seeds for the future. That can help forests to regenerate naturally. So for my second part, I caught some of those forest pigeons that you saw a while ago, the spotted imperial pigeons, tagged them, and then released them, and then using GPS, track where they are moving. So this is my study site again, and let us follow the tracking of the two pigeons. So the green one here is a male, and you can see that it's mainly moving about in that certain patch, but it does cross to other patches. The blue one is a female, and relatively, they don't overlap in range, but they also cross in different patches. And there was actually one instance as well, where the male decided to do an excursion and go very, very far away. Like that. Yeah, it just decided on a field trip, actually. We don't know why. But it did come back, and come back to its regular home range and went around that area. So at most, the male traveled 3.3 kilometers, while the female traveled 1.2 kilometers. It's a very limited sample size, but still, we get an idea of how far they can travel and how far they can bring the seeds that they eat and deposit that in the landscape. While we were tracking the birds, we were also interested in where they're perching. So in the trees where they perch, we had a look around beneath the perch, and what we saw there was very nice. We saw the seedlings growing from the tree that they were eating in the earlier video. So they are actually helping regenerating forests. So we did a little bit of community engagement and promoted that our birds are actually our farmers of the forest. They can help forests regenerate naturally, and if we conserve them, we can work hand in hand in restoring the forest. We also made the comics for the kids, and basically showing how a bird will poop, and the poop will have seeds, and it will grow to become a tree for later generations. So these perches, like natural perches, we've seen that it actually works. And in literature, other people have studied how other types of perches, for example, single standing trees, dead trees, shrubs, rocks, as well as artificial perches, like if you put a pole with a crossbar on top in the middle of a field, they look at whether that would increase seed dispersal. And what they found, or what my synthesis have found, is that actually these natural as well as artificial perches can increase the number of seeds as well as the number of species of seeds that are arriving in an area. So it could be used as a restoration strategy, where in a degraded landscape you can put some perches, and if it attracts the birds, they will go there, perch there, poop there, and the poop will become the forest for the future. So this is a small step forward, my PhD. There's a big challenge ahead of us, which is forest fragmentation, habitat loss, and so forth. But what we found here in the system where I studied in the Philippines is a step forward to learning more on how to tackle the problem. And learning from different systems, from the UK, from the tropics, from the Philippines, etc., these all help in making us understand better how we can conserve the environment. And so, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you guys picked up and learned something new. And these are just some photos from the Philippines.